You probably wouldn't recognize my name. I'm not famous. I've never written a book or appeared on TV. But I've done something many women my age have done without applause. I built a family. I carried it when it couldn't stand on its own. And one day, I realized I wasn't even invited to sit at the table I built. This isn't a revenge story like you see in the movies. It's softer, quieter, but it still ends with justice. My name is Margaret Delaney, and I'm 71 years old. This is the story of what I gave before I stepped away. It started, like many things in my life, with love. My son Brian was only 12 when my husband passed unexpectedly. Heart attack, middle of a Saturday morning while changing the oil in our old Buick. One minute, he was humming along to Johnny Cash on the radio. The next, gone. From that moment on, it was just the two of us. I never remarried. Not because I didn't have the chance, but because I didn't feel like I could afford to give myself to anyone else. Brian needed everything. Stability, routine, a home that never wobbled, no matter how tired I was after double shifts at the courthouse. He grew up polite, smart, and a little reserved. Not the kind to say, "I love you" easily, but I didn't mind. I told myself, as long as he's okay, I'm okay. When he met Elena in his late 20s, I was genuinely happy for him. She was confident, stylish, and came from a family that threw holiday parties with valet parking. I didn't always fit in, but I made sure to wear something nice, bring a pie, and keep my opinions soft. That's what you do when you want to belong. After they got married, Brian asked if I could help a little with the down payment for their first home. He called it a bridge loan while he was between promotions. I didn't hesitate. I dipped into my late husband's insurance, cashed out an old retirement account, and handed him a check for $112,000. I didn't ask whose name would be on the deed. I just smiled and said, "Build something strong." They bought a lovely 2-story colonial in St. Joseph, Missouri, about an hour from where I lived. It was the kind of house with wide porches and too many throw pillows. Elena decorated it like a page from one of those lifestyle magazines. I started helping with the mortgage quietly. $2,500 a month. Brian said it was temporary, but months turned into years. Then came Emma, my only grandchild, the light in my life. She was born during a snowstorm, and I remember standing in the hospital room, holding her tiny body wrapped in blue and white, thinking, this is my second chance to matter. From day one, I offered to help. I never waited to be asked. I paid for daycare when Elena wanted to go back to work part-time at a local boutique. I stocked their fridge when Brian's job at the marketing firm had slow quarters. I even footed the bill for their car repairs twice. In 6 years, I'd given over $180,000 to keep their household running, not counting holidays, birthdays, or those little emergencies they never seemed prepared for, and I never once asked for anything in return. Well, maybe that's not true. I suppose I hoped for something. Not money, not thanks, just inclusion. A seat at the table, a place in their everyday life that wasn't tied to transactions. The baptism was supposed to be special. Emma was turning 3. It was a sunny spring Sunday, the kind where tulips were blooming in sidewalk cracks and the air still held a chill, but the sun made you forget. I wore my navy dress, the one with the pearl buttons Brian once said looked elegant on me. I even curled my hair and packed the small silver locket from my grandmother to give to Emma after the ceremony. It had been passed down 3 generations. I thought it was time. The church in Clayton was beautiful. White stone, stained glass, oak pews that creaked with memory. I arrived 40 minutes early, of course. I always do. Elena came in last in a champagne-colored dress that shimmered under the morning light. She looked perfect. Glossy, polished, radiant. Brian was behind her, carrying Emma in a gown so delicate it looked like it would dissolve in water. "Hi, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek quickly. "Thanks for coming." Thanks for coming. Not, "I'm so glad you're here." Not, "Emma couldn't wait to see Grandma." Just thanks for coming. Like I was an acquaintance, not the woman who paid their mortgage last Tuesday. But I swallowed the sting. I smiled. I took my seat quietly and watched my granddaughter get baptized in the same church where I was married. I thought, This is what love looks like. Sitting still when you want to speak up, smiling when your heart's bruised. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the church hall. White linens, trays of sandwiches, sparkling juice and flutes. Everything curated. Elena did love a perfect scene. I stood near the gift table holding the locket in my hand when I noticed Brian watching me from across the room. He had that hesitant look he gets when he wants to say something but hasn't decided how to package it. He came over, smiling but too tight, too rehearsed. "Mom," he said, leaning in. "Elena and I wanted to mention something about family traditions." I nodded. "Okay, I think after today, it might be best if you took a step back, just a little. Let us start building our own rhythm, space to parent without too many opinions." My fingers clenched around the locket. Not a fight, not an accusation, just dismissal. That was the first crack. I didn't know it then, but everything would unravel from that single, well-mannered blow. I don't remember what I said after Brian asked me to step back. It wasn't what he said exactly, it was how he said it. Calm, reasonable, like we were negotiating a parking spot instead of rewriting the rules of our relationship. I managed to smile, I always do, and murmured something like, "Of course, whatever you think is best." But inside, it felt like my lungs had stopped working. My hands curled tighter around the small silver locket meant for Emma. It had belonged to my grandmother, then my mother, then me. It had never skipped a generation, until now. No one saw me slip it back into my purse. No one noticed when I stepped outside for air. The wind had picked up. I stood under a blooming cherry tree just outside the church hall, watching petals fall like pink confetti. Across the lawn, families were laughing, hugging, taking photos. I spotted Elena in her champagne dress, twirling Emma around for the camera. Brian was next to them, beaming. And there I stood, alone, holding a purse full of silent history. Maybe you understand this kind of moment, the kind where you realize you're not angry yet, you're not heartbroken yet, you're just invisible. Have you ever felt that? If you have, don't scroll away. You and I might have more in common than you think. Back home that evening, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment over and over again. Just take a step back, as if I were hovering, as if I hadn't already spent years walking behind them in silence. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the little bank notebook where I logged every transfer. For years, I'd been sending $2,500 a month toward their mortgage, a few hundred more for daycare, groceries, birthdays. I'd never asked for a receipt, never once asked to be paid back. I looked at the total at the bottom of the page, $183,600. My breath caught. I don't know what shocked me more, the number or the fact that it meant so little to them. The next day, I quietly logged into my online banking and canceled the auto transfers. I didn't call Brian. I didn't write a letter. I just stopped. I thought maybe it would take him a week to notice, maybe 2. He called in 3 days. "Mom?" His voice was tight, clipped. "Hey, weird thing. The mortgage payment didn't go through this month. The bank says the automatic transfer failed. Can you check on that?" I paused. Then I said it, calm and simple. "I canceled it." Dead silence. "Wait, what do you mean?" "I mean," I said, my voice steady, "it's not a mistake." Brian didn't speak right away. I could hear Elena in the background asking what was going on. "You canceled it without telling us?" he finally said, his voice rising. "We count on that, Mom. We built our whole budget around your help." Help. Not generosity, not sacrifice. Just help, like I was a monthly service. "I know," I said, "and that's exactly the problem." He tried calling twice more that week. Each time his tone changed, first frustration, then guilt. The third time he tried sweetness, the kind of false softness adult children use when they want to talk you out of a boundary. "It's just been stressful lately," he said. "Elena's been juggling a lot. She didn't mean what she said at the baptism. She was tired. You know how events get." "I do," I said. "But she didn't say it. You did." stunned him. And it stunned me, too. Because until that moment, I hadn't admitted it to myself. I'd blamed Elena, the polished daughter-in-law with the champagne taste. But it hadn't been her voice in my ear. It was Brian, my son, my only child. He was the one who pushed me out of the picture. Later that week, a friend of mine from the county real estate office called. "Margaret," she said gently, "I probably shouldn't even be telling you this, but Brian's been inquiring about listing the house. Looks like he's meeting with agents next week." I blinked. "But the house? I helped buy that house." "Only his name's on the deed," she said. "Did you ever sign anything?" "No," I whispered. "He said it was just temporary." She paused. "I thought you should know. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat with the realization that I'd helped build a life I was never meant to be part of. I was the scaffolding, the support beams, meant to hold them up until the paint dried, then disappear. At the end of the week, my sister called. "Brian just called me," she said. "He says you cut them off." "I didn't cut them off," I said. "I stopped funding a life I'm not even invited to." She sighed. "I get it. I do. But Margaret, you have to understand, they're under pressure." "So was I," I said. "When I was 28 and widowed, when I worked double shifts and Brian had asthma and I still paid off a car loan I never drove." She didn't respond. And that silence told me everything. The cruelest denials aren't shouted. They're whispered in church halls and dropped between champagne toasts. They sound like thank you without warmth. They look like family photos where you're the one holding the camera, never in the frame. 3 days passed after the call from Brian. I didn't hear anything. Not a text, not a knock on the door, not even a voicemail pretending to check on me. It was almost peaceful. And then I realized they didn't call because they didn't notice I was gone. I kept busy, or tried to. I cleaned the baseboards, organized the pantry, took up crosswords again. But no matter what I did, the silence in my phone weighed heavier than the dust in the corners. I found myself looking at old photos more than usual. There was one that always caught me. Brian at 4 years old, sitting on my lap, both of us holding a popsicle, melted sugar staining our sleeves. He had one hand tangled in my necklace and the other on my cheek. He used to look at me like that. The following week, I got a call from the daycare. "Elena forgot to update the payment information," the woman said gently. "We haven't received this month's tuition for Emma." "Of course not." "I'll have them update it," I replied, keeping my voice calm, but I didn't offer to cover it, not this time. I sat down that night and added it all up again, on paper this time. Mortgage, daycare, groceries, Christmas gifts, emergency flights, $183,600. I wrote the number down. Then I circled it. And underneath, I wrote, "No one said thank you." A few days later, I ran into an old friend, Linda, from book club. I hadn't seen her in over 2 years. "Margaret," she said, touching my arm. "You look thinner. Is everything okay?" I gave her the stock answer. "Just busy with family." She smiled, but something in her face softened. "We miss you at book club. You should come back." I almost said no, almost explained that I had to be available in case Emma got sick or the furnace broke or Brian needed me. But then I remembered no one was calling. "Maybe I will," I said. I decided to make one last stop before going home that day. The lawyer's office. Not for drama, not to start a war, just to protect what I had left. "I'd like to set up a trust," I told the paralegal, "for my granddaughter, for her college. I want to be the sole trustee." She nodded. "We can do that." "And no one else can touch it?" "No one but you." I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even pride. It was peace. That evening, Brian finally called again. "Mom," he said, no hello. "We got a late notice on the mortgage. What's going on?" "I told you," I said. "I canceled the payment." "You don't understand. We built this life with the assumption you'd help. You can't just pull out." "Yes, I can. Emma needs stability. Emma needs parents who budget." There was silence. Then a sigh. Mom, don't make this personal. It is personal, Brian. You told me to step back. I'm just doing what you asked. I thought that would be it. I thought maybe I'd have a week of quiet again, but I was wrong. That Sunday, my sister, Carolyn, showed up on my porch. Can I come in? She asked, already halfway through the door. She dropped her purse on my chair and looked around like she was inspecting the damage. Brian says you've cut them off. I stopped enabling them, I corrected. She raised a brow. Isn't that the same thing? No, I said calmly. It's not. She paced. But what about Emma? She's just a child. She shouldn't suffer for what Brian or Elena did. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I kept my tone even. Emma isn't suffering. I've set up a college fund for her. I'll always make sure she's okay, but I won't let them use her as a pawn. Carolyn shook her head, but she wasn't angry, just confused. I think you're brave, she finally said, but it's going to be lonely. It already was. That night, I poured myself a cup of tea and walked through the living room. I paused at the fireplace. There were old holiday cards from years past, Emma with frosting on her cheeks, Brian and Elena in matching scarves, me in the corner, blurred out like an afterthought. I took one down, then another, until the mantel was clear. I didn't throw them away. I just put them in a box. It was time to stop pretending I was part of something I wasn't. I don't know how to explain what happened next. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no slammed doors, no screaming matches. It was quieter than that. Like the moment after a snowstorm when you realize the world looks different, but you're not sure when the snow stopped falling. I hadn't just been left out. I'd been erased. And finally, I was ready to let them see what that felt like. There's something strange about quiet. Not the peaceful kind, like the hush of snow falling at night. No, this was different. This was the kind of quiet that comes after years of noise, after years of answering the phone every time it rang, showing up every time someone needed something, biting your tongue so hard it bled. Now the phone was silent, and for the first time, I let it be. I started going for walks again, the same streets I used to push Brian's stroller down 30 years ago. The maple trees were taller now, and the cracks in the sidewalk had widened, like everything else in life. I passed the old bookstore on 8th Street, the one I used to go to before Emma was born, before Elena suggested I was too busy to commit to book club anymore. That same afternoon, I walked in and bought a novel, hardback, full price. I told the cashier, "It's a gift for myself." She smiled like I'd said something sacred. When I got home, I didn't head to the kitchen or check the mail or scroll through old text, hoping Brian had written something kind. Instead, I poured a glass of iced tea, curled up on the porch swing, and opened the first page. It felt right. A few days later, I called my old friend Marcia. We hadn't spoken in almost a year. No falling out, just life drifting us in different directions. Directions mostly named Brian and Emma. "Margaret?" she said, surprised. "You okay?" I laughed softly. "Actually, yes, I'm okay. I was just wondering, are you still going to the art class on Thursdays?" "We are," she said, "and we still leave early so we can make it to book club after." There was a pause. Then, gently, "Want to come?" I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. That Thursday, I walked into a room full of women my age, some with paint on their cheeks, others with dog-eared novels in their purses. Nobody asked me for money. Nobody asked me to explain why I'd been gone. They just poured me a cup of coffee and asked what I'd been reading. Later that night, I stood in front of the hallway mirror. Same silver hair, same soft eyes. But something was different. I looked taller somehow. Not physically, but like someone who'd stopped shrinking to fit the shape others made for her. For so long, I'd poured my whole identity into being Brian's mother and Emma's grandma, into being helpful, available, quiet, invisible. But now I could see it so clearly. I had become a background character in my own story, and I was finally ready to step back in. The next morning, I received a package in the mail. No return address, just my name, carefully printed in Brian's handwriting. Inside, a photo album. On the cover, it said, "Our Family Memories." Inside, page after page of glossy smiles, birthdays, holidays, vacations. In almost every picture, I was the one behind the camera. The rare photos where I appeared, I was off to the side, or cropped at the shoulders, or blurred. I closed the book and sat with it in my lap, and then I whispered, "That's enough." Later that afternoon, I walked into the bank and sat down with a financial advisor. "I want to open a college fund," I said, "for my granddaughter, but I want it locked. I'm the only one with access." He nodded. "We can do that. Do you want her parents notified?" "No," I said simply. "Not yet." He didn't ask why, and I didn't explain. Because this time, I wasn't asking anyone's permission to do what I knew was right. I spent the rest of the week doing small things that felt big. I made a lemon cake for no occasion. I rearranged my living room. I bought a dress I didn't need. I stopped checking my phone. The silence from Brian and Elena wasn't cruel anymore. It was clarifying. Because in their absence, I found something I hadn't heard in years. My own voice. That weekend, I sat in my garden with Marcia. We sipped sweet tea and talked about books and flowers and old memories that didn't hurt. "You seem lighter," she said. "I am," I replied. "I stopped waiting to be thanked, and I started remembering who I was before they forgot." Marcia smiled, then looked out at the marigolds blooming in their beds. "You know," she said, "sometimes when you step back, they finally realize what they lost." "Maybe," I said, reaching for my tea. "But even if they don't, I've found something better." She looked at me. "What's that?" And I answered simply, "Me." By June, the hydrangeas in my front yard had bloomed, fat and full, bending under their own weight. I stood on the porch with my hands on my hips, watching them sway in the breeze like they didn't have a care in the world. Funny thing was, I didn't either. Not anymore. It's not that I didn't still love them. Brian, Elena, little Emma. Of course I did. But love wasn't the same as enabling, and love certainly wasn't the same as sponsoring. They hadn't called in 2 weeks. No texts, no voicemails, no random photos of Emma eating pancakes or playing in the backyard like I used to get when they still wanted something. And that silence? It used to feel like punishment. Now it felt like space. I started cooking for myself again. Real cooking. Not heating up leftovers from Emma's plate or snacking on cereal at the kitchen sink because I was too tired from babysitting. I made pot roast, fresh biscuits, a peach cobbler from scratch. I set the table for one, not in sadness, but in peace. Thursdays became my favorite day. That was art class in the morning, book club in the evening, and usually a coffee in between with Marcia, who had a laugh that could shake the windows. We talked about everything and nothing. No guilt, no pressure, no one asking if I could babysit just this once or transfer money for an unexpected car repair. No one asked me for anything, and somehow, that was everything. One night, I got a message from my old neighbor, Donna. "Your garden looks amazing, Margaret, and you look younger these days. Secret?" I replied, "Boundaries and lemon cake." She sent back a laughing emoji. I wasn't joking. Around the same time, I went into the attic and pulled down a dusty box labeled Margaret Before. Inside were pieces of myself I'd almost forgotten. My travel journal from the summer I spent in Ireland at 22, watercolor sketches. A letter I wrote to myself at 40, "Don't forget who you are even when you're caring for everyone else." I'd forgotten, but now I was remembering. Then came the mortgage letter. It arrived in Brian's handwriting. Hand-delivered, not mailed. I saw him from the window, tired, shoulders slumped, standing on my porch like a man who wasn't sure he was still welcome. I didn't rush to the door. I finished folding my dish towel, took a sip of my tea, and then opened it. "Hey, Mom," he said, holding up an envelope. We're having trouble. With the house. I thought maybe we could talk." I stepped aside and let him in. The house was warm and smelled like cinnamon and citrus. I just baked a cake, for no one in particular. He noticed. "You're baking again?" I nodded. I never really stopped. I just stopped baking for people who never stayed to eat. He looked at the floor. Things are hard right now, he said. I know, I replied. We might lose the house. You might, I said gently. It's a big house. We bought it because you said you'd help. No, I corrected. I said I'd help you get started. I never said I'd build the whole thing for you. He sat at my table, the same table where I taught him how to write his name, and finally, looked me in the eye. Mom, he said, I didn't realize how much we leaned on you, how much you carried. I know, I said again, but I did. We talked for a while. He told me about Elena working part-time, trying to go full-time, about Emma's new preschool, about his job cutting hours. But for once, he didn't ask me for money. He just wanted to be heard, and I listened. Not because I owed it, because I chose to. When he left, he hugged me tighter than he had in years. I miss you, he said. I never left, I replied. I just stopped letting myself be invisible. The next day, Elena sent a photo. Just one. Emma in her new school uniform holding a picture she'd drawn. It said, My grandma's name is Margaret. She likes books and flowers and cookies. Underneath, she'd drawn a big heart. That night, I lit a candle on the windowsill. Not to signal anything, just to remind myself that I was still here, still whole, still worthy, even if no one came knocking. 3 months later, on a cold afternoon in early November, I heard the knock. It was soft, polite, not urgent like the last time, not panicked, just careful. I opened the door to see Brian standing alone on the porch, holding a pie tin with a lopsided pecan pie and a familiar, nervous smile. We baked this, he said. Well, Elena did. I stirred. I stepped aside without a word and let him in. The house smelled like rosemary and bread. I just pulled a loaf out of the oven for no one in particular. The kind of baking you do for yourself, just because the smell makes the house feel like it remembers you. Brian stood in the entryway, looking at everything like he was stepping into a room from his childhood. Not a stranger's house, but not quite his anymore either. I like what you've done with the place, he said. I like who I've become in it, I replied. He sat at the kitchen table, that old scratched wood full of family history and burnt candle wax from birthday cakes long past. I wanted to tell you, he said, we sold the house. Got a decent price for it, even with the market. I nodded. That's good. We bought a small place in Elmhurst. Just a little ranch. 3 bedrooms, 1 bath. Emma loves the backyard. He hesitated before continuing. Elena got a full-time job. She's actually doing well. She's different, more grounded. I raised an eyebrow. And you? He laughed, but it was quiet, humble. I'm learning how to live without backup, without assuming someone will catch me. I'm learning how to be a grown man. I think that's long overdue. I poured us tea, lemon balm, his childhood favorite, and we sat in a silence that wasn't heavy, just honest. After a while, he looked at me and said, Mom, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you recognition. He paused. You gave us everything, and instead of honoring that, I treated you like a bank, a convenience. I let Elena push you out, and I stood there and watched. I'm ashamed of that, but I want you to know, I see it now. I see you now. It didn't undo the hurt, but it did matter. Because for the first time, he wasn't saying it to win me back. He was saying it because it was true. That weekend, they invited me over for dinner. No fancy invitations, no garden club cardstock, just a phone call from Brian. Emma wants to bake cookies with you. I brought sprinkles and my mother's old recipe. When I arrived, Emma ran into my arms like she'd never let go. Grandma Cat, she shouted, her hair tied in crooked pigtails. Daddy says you make the best snowflake cookies. I knelt and smiled at her. He's finally right about something. Elena was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, face open, and, surprisingly, warm. Hi, Margaret, she said. Thanks for coming. Her voice was quieter than I remembered. She looked at me like someone who had stopped seeing a threat and started seeing a human being. After dinner, when the dishes were done and Emma was playing with her flower-covered doll, Elena sat across from me at the table. "I was wrong," she said. "About a lot." She took a deep breath. "You intimidated me, not because you tried to, but because you were complete. You didn't need anyone to validate you, and I didn't know how to handle that. I thought if I made you smaller, I'd somehow feel bigger." I didn't say anything. I just let her speak. "I know now that you weren't trying to take over. You were just trying to love us." Then she added, "Thank you for stepping back. If you hadn't, we never would have learned how to stand on our own. Emma would have grown up thinking love meant expecting, not appreciating." That night, as I walked back to my car under the early winter sky, I paused on the sidewalk. I looked back at their little house, warm lights in the window, laughter behind the glass, a new kind of family built not on dependency, but choice. They had grown, but so had I. A week later, I rearranged the photos on my mantle. Old ones came down, blurry, distant, full of half smiles and shadows. In their place, I put new ones. Emma holding up her snowflake cookie, frosting everywhere. Brian painting their new front porch. Elena sitting on the floor, laughing, her arms wrapped around their daughter. And in every photo, this time, I was there. Not on the edge, not in the background. Right in the center. If any part of this story felt familiar to you, if you've ever loved quietly, sacrificed without applause, or found yourself forgotten in the family you helped build, I want you to know you're not alone. Sometimes stepping back isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And sometimes the silence does speak for you, louder than words ever could. Tell me in the comments, have you ever stepped aside for someone who didn't understand what you gave? I'd love to hear your story. We heal together, one quiet voice at a time.